All right. Welcome to another episode of New Wine Uncorked. And as always, I'm stoked to be here with Phil and with Tony. And we at New Wine are about building bridges in contemporary culture through Jesus. And if anyone has been around for this last year, we all know that the relational bridges has been quite tough to build through COVID and the like. And there's been a lot of movement over these last few months, and especially with the introduction of the vaccine now, with 3 different vaccines going on, and so the church is posed to step in and to help usher in hopefully times of peace. We like to think, and the hope is for all of us, is that the corner is actually in view, and that we are rounding this corner for whatever normalcy is. And I think sometimes when I think about this, guys, is there a time though for the church that the church has never been where there's a time of peace where the church hasn't been needed? I wonder if sometimes, we're so used to turmoil and chaos that we don't think that peace is even possible. And so people don't even turn to the church. Or has the church been absent so much? Have we, as the church, the Christian church, been disengaged from society, then that when this talk of peace or shalom, people don't even look to the church anymore because we've just been disengaged from society. So when it talks about, rounding the corner for COVID and the hope for peace and getting back, no one even thinks about the church because the church hasn't been involved. And so I was wondering, last week, New Wine participated, and we put on a conference for mental health, building bridges, not walls. And as we continue to move into 2021, and we're halfway through the Lenten season, and we're moving into Easter, how do you see the church's role ushering in, or is the church even an usher in of peace in the midst of vaccines and COVID? And how can the church build bridges of mental health and security and peace in this time of turmoil? Or is this better for the church to remain or is the church even engaged? Some would say it's not even engaged, so where it's always been disengaged. Should the church remain as it is, or do we have a role in this as we move forward as followers of Christ in 2021 with all of this going on around it? What is the role for the church today?
Yeah, I can jump in first with this. One, there's probably 3 things that come to mind. The first one is caution. Just as we're gathering back together, don't forget that, COVID is still out here. So wearing masks, being distanced at church is going to be a thing. Um, so that's going to be a thing. But in combination with that is the excitement of getting back together. So many churches haven't been meeting for this length of time. And there's going to be some kind of wreckage that's connected with that being locked in the house for more than a year. There's been some issues. And so there's going to be some excitement, but there's going to be some caution. And we have to be kind of aware as we're re-meeting up with our friends from church, brothers and sisters that we haven't seen for a while. And yeah, just kind of listen very well to what's been going on, and do those things to kind of get reconnected, kind of just seeing one another. But the last thing that comes to my mind is the vaccine. And being honest about our opinions regarding the vaccine. um I know recently you had a basketball player come out and say, it's going to be a very personal thing for him, and it is. And a lot of people responded to that. Well, some people responded to that by saying, it's not a personal thing. I'm going to go get mine in front of everybody on TV. So, and then the questions asked, well, wait, is it your guys' time to even get the vaccine yet? so, so all those things come to play. The vaccine, how we just are cautiously figuring out how we're going to reopen our churches and give churches some space to figure that out. There may be some really excited, let everyone come in, and then very quickly realize, no, we can't do it. There's actually a church locally that they opened up, and they were prepared to have live in-person services, ready to go, social distance, all the things. and the I think lead pastor and worship pastor tested positive for COVID right after that, and so they put all their plans on hold. so, so that's part of the thing. That's part of the thing. But the vaccine, be honest about our take on the vaccine. People have their cautions there too, so have your cautions. I ended up getting the first dose of Pfizer a couple of weeks ago, and partly because of where I work, we were pretty close to. We were in the first group that was able to get it, but I was not the first in line. I really waited to a good chunk, probably a good 70% of my coworkers ended up getting it. I wanted to see what happened with them. They actually ended up getting fully vaccinated before I got my first dose. So
Hmm.
I had my cautions. I waited for a little bit, but I knew in the back of my mind I was going to get it anyway. But I wanted to see how things were going to go out, and I didn't want to be on the front lines for that. So
Hmm.
those three things. That's where I start. So.
Yeah, it, the phrase that comes to me repeatedly is "there's always something," in quotes, because when we look at the early church and the New Testament, depending on the interpretation you take, um, some people would say that Jesus and the apostles saw that the end of the world was imminent, that it was coming sooner rather than later. And so that's why they didn't worry about political power, or as an early church, as the church was getting its legs underneath it, it wasn't worried about stature, but it embraced the suffering and being poor because it knew that Jesus would return and all would be made new. Well, that posture almost seems to have gone on for the last 2,000 years, that there's always something. And maybe throughout history, it's that posture has served as a wonderful tool, that man, the focus is on serving and not preserving. But then somewhere along the way that got hijacked. And within the last maybe 60 years, we see these prophets of apocalypse. Like there's always something, blood moon, and the like. 2000, the year 2000, the computer is going to take over, and Terminator is going to be true, and the like. And then most recently, the vote was stolen, and President Trump is going to be inaugurated not as the 35th president again, but as the 19th president, because Ulysses S. Grant was the 18th president, and he was inaugurated on March 4th. And this is like the QAnon, like there's always something. But on the flip side of that, like I think everybody who doesn't support the Republican Party and President Trump now suddenly I think there's a lack of critique for Biden. And there's this idea that President Biden, now that he's in power, everything's going to be okay. And we want Biden to make these promises to us because we want some sort of normalcy back. We want to feel comfortable and safe. And so people keep pushing. And recently he released a statement saying, okay, the goal is to have every adult eligible for a vaccination by May, and we hope to return to some normalcy by July 4th. And I feel like that's along the same spectrum of there's always something. If it's
Hmm.
not doom and gloom, it's always a promise for a better future. But neither of those things are rooted in our reality of who Jesus has called us to be. We're neither supposed to move towards this um, Armageddon posture of, okay, let's prep because the world is ending and we need to hunker down, nor are we supposed to move towards this blind optimism that sugarcoats the pain and the suffering of reality, because neither positions or postures prepare us to actually answer the need of our time. We're not supposed to say, this is a false reality and where's the conspiracy, where's the cabal running the show, nor are we supposed to move towards this just tell me what I want to hear, because I think it does tremendous harm when President Biden says, I want to return us back to normalcy by July 4th. You're giving so many people false promises and you can't deliver that. And then you have Anthony Fauci To some extent, I understand why he did what he did, but he goes, he keeps moving the level or the percentage by which we need to achieve vaccination for herd immunity, because he's worried that the American public can't be trusted with that information, that we're going to become lackadaisical. And to an extent, I agree. I mean, look at the last 4 years. Like, to an extent, the American public cannot be trusted. But on the other hand, I think what we've been conditioned for as people in our Western American society is we're placing our trust in the wrong places.
Mm.
And so personally, what I've been so grateful for is 2-3 weeks ago that I've transitioned to a new church in a new role. And at this church, we leadership has placed an intentional core value that just like you, Phil, when other churches that are comparable to our size, our congregational size, reopen, we will lag behind at least 2 to 3 weeks, because we have a large population of elderly people, and it's our priority that they feel safe and that they are protected in the assembly and in the gathering of the saints. And so our leadership has laid out this well thought through format of triggers, that when a particular event takes place, a trigger will happen, and a committee and a team of leadership will come together to assess a situation. And if it is a positive assessment, another trigger will take place internally that activates another committee so that we can meet the needs of our church well. And so through the course of this conversation, what we realized is who are the most vulnerable among us, and who are the most likely to re-enter the physical assembly of the church because they have access to vaccines. And we decided our most vulnerable are our elderly, and they're the most likely to get vaccinated. So the conversation from that we had that started with how do we reopen, transformed into how do we get the elderly vaccinated, not just within our community, our church family, but the larger community as a whole. Because technology, it was difficult for me to sign up for vaccinations. And so I can only imagine what's like for somebody who has 40, 50, 60 years on me, who can't navigate a Google form. Um, and so the heartbeat of my church has switched from how do we reopen and get everybody in the building to how do we care for the least and the vulnerable. How do we care for the people who don't have access and equitable resources for vaccinations? And I love that that's the heartbeat of my church, that reopening is great, but let's be the body of Christ and care for our elderly. This is how we honor them. This is how we ensure that they continue to have a say and a stake in the future and the direction of the church, because we're actively working to keep them around so that they can continue to contribute to the life of the church. And so for me, that's what I've seen that's just floored me. And I am so humbled and so blessed to be a part of a team that really prioritizes the vulnerable among us, because we talked about the vulnerable and now we're taking actionable steps. And so next week I'm a part of a translation committee that will be serving about 500 people from the Asian community in Washington County who will be coming to our church to get vaccinated. And it floors me, the opportunity I have to just serve in this critical time. I get to be a part of something that's beyond myself, and I get to play such a minor role in helping translate from Vietnamese to English and English to Vietnamese for somebody who may have such a tremendously difficult time getting access to a vaccine. I get to play a small part in that, and I feel that that is how I'm able to live into my pastoral calling. So in long sum, there's always something, but I'm so grateful that I get to be a part of solving that something.
But don't you think though that your church did um, what most Christians, in fact, I would say all Christians should do, is you flipped the question. It's not the most important thing. It's not how do we open up. The most important thing is how do we care for the most vulnerable? And in caring for the most vulnerable, guess what? We're going to then be able to open up. I feel like what's happened is the church has got caught up in the consumeristic trends pushing forward. And we've, Biden, I don't know what the statement is any different. I'm sorry we're going to have all adults vaccinated by July 4th, or so we can open up. That's our hope. What's any different than, well, I think the vaccination is miraculously going to go away by April. Remember last year, like President Trump had a lot of the same, statements and condemned him, and they from the left side, and even Christians would say, oh my gosh, how can this guy is a tool and all these things. And yet now I feel like same thing, making these promises. I mean, any pastor knows that early on you have to learn, you cannot promise people that things are gonna work out. It's like a doctor coming in to diagnose things. This is why a lot of people have issues with doctors, is because they don't seem very upfront, and because they don't tell us what we want a lot to hear a lot of times. And so I wonder if the church has got caught up into, so many churches have got caught up in playing, because I find it interesting where when we talk about the vaccine, you start to now get into, at least in conversations, do I admit that I got the vaccine? Do I admit that I'm okay with the vaccine? Am I okay with the vaccine? If I'm a Christian, wait, should I be? Because this is a question of, again, coming back to vulnerability. I was able to get the vaccine as well because of being an educator. And I question, not that I don't think that I should get it. And each one of you has a role, right, because of where we're at. However, it was a weird thing for me because I'm in my 40s, and so I'm healthier than some other educators, simply because of age. Let's say, there are plenty of 65 and older educators. Fine. So should we push for that? But what about then anyone in my age group of educators, that for schools that are already in, we should be pushing for, but if you've looked in areas of the most vulnerable in our culture, we think we just look at age or sickness, but what about economic vulnerability? We're seeing that a lot of impoverished or poorer areas are not getting the vaccines. And so what about these bigger churches? I had not been reading, see what your church is doing, Tony. That's freaking awesome. Isn't that how churches, and I hope, and maybe this is because our church is working the same thing. We're working with the county to get it to where we are placed, because we've been offering, our church has been used for shots since the beginning. But the question is after this, let's say after the vaccine, can we still do something using this same togetherness and still serving our less, those that are as vulnerable after the vaccine? Because it's interesting within the Christian world too. Like, I agree with you guys. Should I be the one getting the vaccine? Like, I want my church stepping in and saying, okay, let's first have a dialogue for if you're for vaccine or anti-vaccine. Let's learn how to dialogue with this. But then the church stepping in and saying, how can we be, like, in our area, how can we be for the least of these, whether it's economic or, because like you were saying, Tony, we the three of us deal with technology all the time. And my wife and I, we actually had to get on and start looking through, because we wanted to make sure our parents, were able to get the vaccine. But man, we would get on one site. My wife got on a site, made an appointment, everything, went, and the place was shutting down at 3 every day, and she went at 6. But they were making appointments till 6. Well, if you're a little bit older, or let's just say you don't have much interaction with the internet, how confusing is that? And then you go, and yet we're not talking about it because we don't realize that. And so our church started to go, oh, like you were saying, Tony, we need folks just to help some that are not as used to the internet how to even navigate this. And so what we recognize is some of the vulnerability was just not even knowing how to navigate the, and so we had to have like Zoom meetings and set up Zoom meetings to get together with folks who need help. Weekly, my family does a Zoom meeting with my grandmother. And for the first couple of times, we had to get on there saying, hey, Nana, this is how you organize, right? How many churches are even thinking through that? Like, going back to what you were saying, Tony, you're building bridges within your community by looking at it. Phil, where you work, you know, with the your work, you have to build bridges because the folks around you that you're serving, they don't have the capacity to build bridges, those relational bridges. So you're thinking of the other. Is that the typical motif? Is that the mentality of most churches today? Or there's always something? Is the excuse for the churches not to step into, hey, because once we start dealing with the vaccine, guess what? There's always something else, you know? So I take what you're saying, and yet I feel the tension within the Christian realm of about the vaccine. Do I admit that I've gotten it yet? Should I admit it? Because we all, you know, we're all young and healthy, but that's not the point. The point is to get enough people, even if they're young and healthy, vaccinated, if they're working with, you know, other. So it's like, I feel like this dialogue needs to be happening on a continual basis. And my fear is that since Trump has left, people who from the church just wanted to chuck all the blame on that. But it's still, there are still folks who allow, because there's such disarray within the church, we don't have a clear, hey, here's how dialogue works with like the vaccine, with the masking and things. And what do you see? The people who are supposed to be procuring peace are the ones always bitching and moaning with each other. And so if the people that are from the man of peace, you know, Jesus was to usher in peace and shalom, I think that people think that we're always in a state of disarray and end times when you look at the church, because we're always infighting. How do we continue to move again? So I appreciate the dialogue and the fact that, Phil, I think it's, how many others even thought about, hey, I'm going to wait because, and I think some will say, oh, well, he just waited because he wanted to make sure that the others, you know, let them take a bite of the food first to see if they get sick, right? And yet your thing was, and same thing what you're talking about, Tony, is stepping back and seeing the other and saying, hey, are there more folks that are in a greater need? And like that, like there needs to be that dialogue of the tension of back and forth of, you need healthy people though to go get the vaccine so they can continue and not be part of the sickness. But then you also need the combination of those that are most vulnerable to get it. How are we doing? I don't see a lot of churches participating in this. You know, they're more concerned about how do we open up, and how do we, like doing what you're doing, Tony, like how do more churches partner to do that? And do they even care? Like, have they been about building relational bridges, or are we still about the bottom dollar? And what COVID's teaching us is that's exactly where the church is at. It's like no other, it's the same as any other business.
Yeah, Tony, what what your church is doing is commendable, definitely. Just stepping back and reconsidering and targeting your efforts at the most vulnerable, and just all the work. Everything you explained was really cool. I as you were explaining, I was wondering how many churches were thinking, hey, if the government said it's okay, let's jump in and then start getting together. Kind of that excitement piece that I was bringing up. We can do it, so let's go. But not stepping back to say, wait, what have we been doing? Have we been waiting for the government's call, whether or not we can gather? Because that is problematic. That would be problematic to me. And I can't say that's what churches were doing, but what I can see is as soon as the date came that people can start gathering a little bit, a bunch of churches coming out saying, hey, we're starting live in-person services, and in some regard we could have been doing that before. I mean, that stuff could have been happening before. I still remember when at the beginning of COVID, and a lot of the major churches in our area put together that collected statement that they were going to stand with our governor. You remember that months and year ago now, right? and just remembering that energy. And then at the same token, yeah, kind of waiting for the governor. And at that point, I was with them, standing with the governor. And I don't think that was necessarily wrong, in particular with the political environment that was probably even heightened. At this point of the game, I don't know if we should have been waiting for the governor to say do ministry now. I don't know if that's what that word was, but I felt kind of that's what the word was. And I don't know if anyone stopped. I mean, I don't know if anyone could have stopped doing ministry. Gathering in church on Sunday, yeah, maybe, but that's not the only way to do ministry. You know, there's all so many other things, there's so many other needs that arose during that time that we needed believers to be doing it. So the strange thing about that is most people that are doing it aren't really telling anyone they're doing it. They're working, they're handling the business. And so I know that part of it is a way that the church has been a leader in this regard. We have been continually, the church has been giving to people in need. The church has been coming to the most vulnerable and finding ways to help. It hasn't been a thing that's been shouted from the mountaintops or been seen on TV, because when we do see churches on TV over these past couple of years, we know what we've seen. So so I don't think that we should have been waiting for the governor to tell us now is the time to do ministry. But I think during this time, we should have been figuring out ways that we can minister to those around us, and we can help just the people at our church, even if it's through a Zoom call and or through online services. But now, as we're opening back up, this is now a new way. This is now another way that we can do. We can do more of the same efforts that we wanted to do because we don't have the limitation of not being able to gather. So I'm excited in that regard too, to see what we do. And Tony, what you said with your church is really cool. They're taking the opportunity to gather and saying, hey, let's bring a bunch of people to our area to now not have a church service, but take the vaccine. That's actually pretty cool.
No, thanks, Phil. Yeah, I think to your point, Matt, with us, we need to be careful not to scapegoat Trump and Trump supporters, and so lest anybody accuse me or us of like only piling on now that even though that Trump's no longer in presidency. Like I equally have beef with people on the left and people who support Biden. Like I recently just saw this meme where somebody was like, Biden said he would cancel our student loans. Why won't he do it? I propose that we find one guy on earth and we make him have all of our loans and then we kill him so the loans no longer exist. And then somebody replied, I think you just invented Christianity. And it's just like, guys, the amount of brain energy it takes for us just to try to have quick fix solutions, and rather than putting our hands to the plow and committing to staying together and persevering through the hardship and the suffering, like both sides are guilty of that. I think of this church in Snohomish, Washington. They recently just released a video on their Instagram and Facebook page. Their pastor is a fairly outspoken critic of Governor Inslee and the government, but they were just saying they received a notice from the Attorney General of Washington saying you guys can't meet because you guys are defying like COVID regulations and you guys are creating a hotspot. So they created this video campaign saying that you can cancel concerts, you can cancel movie theaters, you can cancel, and then the list goes on. And then, but the pastor's in this dark room as he's giving this tirade. But then he says, but you cannot cancel the church. And then lights come on. And in the background, there's like this crowd of his congregants as their faces come into view. And he's standing there in the middle of this crowd. I'm like, am I watching like religious propaganda or the new Justice League video? Like, what are we trying to cancel? And the very same church and the very same pastor will say, look at our brothers and sisters in China and the Middle East who are persecuted, who have to assemble in the dark of night, and sit around a radio and listen to the word over crackling and static, like their church is canceled, but they are faithful. And then we think of our friend John MacArthur in California, who the government cannot take away my right. I will gladly go to jail and be out on bail because I make millions of dollars a year off of the NIV Study Bible and the New King James. And I'm just sitting here, I'm like, these guys, like, on the one hand, they're like, you cannot cancel the church. And then they point to the church in China. It's like, look at their suffering. And their ecclesiology does not seem to match up. Because you're saying, oh, if the church doesn't assemble, it's not the church. But then you look at the church in China and you're like, well, look at that church. That church can't assemble in the same convention that you assemble. So are you saying the church in China is not the same church that you are under this regulatory time of COVID? I think it's all a farce. It's one big game of show and tell. Like, you can't have your own cake and eat it too. Like, you're not consistent. All you are doing is just making a big show and a big kerfuffle, and you're putting real people at risk. Christ is ashamed. Christ is so, when we use his name and people who actually suffer, who are martyrs for the kingdom, as propaganda for our own preferences. I think Jesus, we make a mockery of the cross. It is debaucherous what we do when we say, oh, you can't cancel church. Nobody is trying to cancel church. And if your ecclesiology is so weak that you think not gathering together is sinful, man, I think we've misplaced our hope and our faith.
Yeah. Why do you think, as you were talking, Tony, and I was thinking about this, why do you think, I mean, yes, Hebrews talks about do not neglect getting together. And Phil, you were talking about this with ministry. A lot of people haven't stopped doing ministry. If you think that church has stopped simply because COVID hasn't allowed us to get together on Sundays, then I'm wondering, yeah, Tony, if you even have if these folks have a proper understanding of ecclesiology, maybe that's the issue. Maybe the issue is that the pastors that we've been raising up and training up in our seminaries today might not have a proper view of ecclesiology, such that they don't think that church even exists apart from that Sunday gathering. I'm wondering, because the folks that tend to speak out, we have a church in this Northern California area, fairly big, and the pastor same thing. If you're not here in person, you have to ask yourself why. And then he looks at the camera and says, but we're not saying that you on Zoom are any less, but what we're saying is you need to be here, and it comes on the weekend where they gave out their finances, and, they're close to 2 million that they're making a year, bringing in. And I'm like, it's insanity, in the sense that a lot of the push, again, coming back to going open, is more about, I feel like it's more about getting me there so that they can then start to ask me for money. And it comes back to, and cover of the church, I can only imagine those folks who have heard these things about the church, when they then come back to, meeting together now in some of these churches, they're being fed the same food, the same bread that's been typical throughout the years behind with the church, is that its only care about the only concern for the church is its money, and so that now, again, it comes back to when vaccines are not a way for it to help protect people, but it's a way to help the church open up, and again, it comes back to that tension of, can a government stop a church from being a church? And that's what it seems like we're saying, is, as the government and COVID, a disease, an infection, is something that can stop the church from being the church. And so I even go one step further, Tony, and wonder, where has the ecclesiology been dropped if we believe that church can't happen if we're not meeting on Sundays, that we have to create such dynamic videos to say, hey, look, if you want excitement, you want action, there's a big church down here that did it a couple years ago for their Christmas celebration. They actually lifted up the drummer in a cage and moved him around. Last year, or 2 years ago, they had one of the main worship dudes sitting at the piano, and they raised him up. I'm like, it was like, a while back, I think it was Motley Crue or Van Halen or Aero, one of these old, like the dudes that are in their 60s, they had to do something big to come back and retour. And what do? They lifted, I think it was Motley Crue, they lifted Tommy Lee Jones up on, and he did his little thing. I'm like, holy crap, the church is Emily. And then with your video, like, I just saw the trailer for the new DC, the Conquer thing. And that's what I was envisioning when you're like, oh my gosh, the lights come on. I'm like, oh my gosh, which one, which pastor? Oh, that's Pastor Batman and that pastor. Like, it's like they should have had little things on there, right? That's what we're saying. And yet, isn't that though the confidence that the Christian should have? Is like, we do have like a big JC on our chest, like we are supermen and women, but that's not the way Jesus acted. Like, he walked in and he was the man of sorrows. And I just go back to our mental health conference, and how many people they just need to know that they're seen. And so I understand the common person who doesn't understand a lot about ecclesiology or soteriology or Christology, but what they know that they've been told about the church is if they need just to be accepted or belong, the church is the place throughout history that you're supposed to be able to go to get that. The more we move into the church as being a body of business, and money makers, the less the person feels that security of just knowing someone cares. Because I feel like the absence of the church, all it leads to are the end times, in the sense of, for the human, we could go on forever, but it would still be the end times for the human. Because when a humanistic, philosophy without a God is the majority belief for the people, all we end up doing is become carnivorous, right? We just consume one another, because without anyone telling us this is an absolute good, well, the only good that I have is based on me. And I feel like that's what the church has to be careful about with this vaccination and the masking. If we put it so much on, though, the personal choice, hey, you have to do this, which it is true, salvation still is a personal choice, choosing to wear a mask, getting a vaccine. But shouldn't we, though, still, as the church, continue to force folks into thinking of the other as you're vaccinating, as you're masking? Yes, think about yourself, but love the Lord your God, okay? Love your neighbor as yourself. So if I'm doing this, what's best for me, is it also best for my neighbor? Has the church even lost that basic mentality that primary to the gospel is love? Love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. So you can, and so where is it in this whole masking vaccination process that the church, I feel like sometimes we've just missed out. So we have to even have plans as to how do we become the church again? Caring for the least of these, like your church is doing, Tony, because our culture has become so bent up on numbers. How many people are vaccinated? Well, that church is used to numbers. How many people are in our seats? And so we're just going back and forth with vaccination and masking. But what we're really doing is we're trying to just get people back into our seats so that they can become paying customers again. That's what it feels like so often. Where is the love for the other, that compassion? Aren't we all vulnerable in some sense? The rich are just as vulnerable. They're vulnerable to being lured into thinking that because they're rich and they come from these areas, hey, we're the COVID can't catch us, because so that vulnerability, even they are vulnerable, and that's where I take your point, Tony. It's not one right side or left side of the political spectrum that's correct. We're all messed up. Where's the voice of the church come in and saying, hey, I love Jesus. This is what it looks like. It's messy. We go to 3 different churches, but we need to learn how to dialogue with each other to find out how can we support one another, encourage one another, be bearers of hope and peace, and not always, yes, there needs to be criticalness, we need to hold one another. Hey, here's a way for us to love the other better. But one way, like, there's a third way, that's the Jesus way, that's more inclusive, but it doesn't say that, it's all, hey, whatever you want, don't worry about it. What I'm saying is, like, we still have dialogue. Just because Jesus is involved doesn't mean that you can just do whatever you want. And I'm not going to ever worry about it, because, hey, that's your relationship with Jesus. This is my relationship with Jesus. Same thing. I feel like we're getting into that with COVID. Well, that's your belief. That's fine. And the churches aren't having, what would Jesus be doing in this situation? I know it's so cliche and so cheesy, but sometimes we need the cheesiness to bring a little bit of spice and flavor to our, you need the cheese on the popcorn to bring a little bit of flavor to it sometimes. I don't know, but I don't want too much flavor. You know what I'm saying? It's like, how do we get into that mix and have these dialogues? I don't know if anyone's doing it. We just get the MacArthurs and the Metaxases and the stuff, and they're just like, oh, dude, you're not our way. Then, and it's, people are like, where is the Jesus of the 21st century?
Yeah. What I notice about these churches is, as Protestants, they are so quick to slander the Roman Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox Church and say, we affirm the priesthood of all believers, and Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, it's so top down, and they make pastors indispensable, and that's heresy, that the only way you can encounter God is through the pastor, and yada yada yada. But uh their criticisms and their critiques are really self-evident of their own practices. Because if they truly believed in the priesthood of all believers, why is it so important that you bring everybody back under your leadership, and your pulpit and your preaching? If you are actively living out your conviction that we are all pastoral in our capacity for the way that we care for one another and love one another and shepherd one another, that we're all just under shepherds, under the true shepherd, why is it so important that we all come back to a physical gathering? Nobody is questioning whether or not we will gather, because we will. There will be a time where the churches are able to safely gather. Nobody is questioning that. Um, and so these pastors and these churches are acting as if the government is imposing a no Jesus, no church. But that's, if they're reading the legislation, if there has been any legislation, if they're reading government or governor orders as church is now canceled, it's indicative of the way they read their Bible. Sloppy, eisegetical, and very anthropocentric. Like, nobody is trying to cancel church. And so I like Phil said, keep the same energy. If you're critiquing Roman Catholicism of its lack of priesthood of all believers, stay true to that conviction. In Protestantism, are we all priests in this priesthood, or are there only a particular few who have the special gifting, the special anointing, the special Gnostic knowledge, the spiritual maturation of the gospel secret? Like, I'm confused. Sitting here, I'm confused, because uh, Jesus is either still on his throne, or because church is canceled, now he has to get up. Like, what's the deal? So I'm with you, Matt. I want to stay consistent.
Yeah, that inconsistency is confusing, but when has American Christianity not been inconsistent or confusing? But I think in relationship to what both you guys are saying, and I think this started a little while ago, with one of your comments, Tony, where where's our hope? Where's our hope? And I think very often we may shout from the mountaintop that our hope is in Jesus, but many of us are really saying our hope is in our leader, that's our pastor.
Mhm.
And in many ways, we see that the actions of some pastors are demonstrating that their hope is in the church of them. Um, it's really intoxicating to be at the head of a big group, regardless as to whether you're president, whether you're governor, whether you're mayor, or whether you're a pastor of a massive church. It doesn't have to even be a massive church. It could be 20 people. But as long as you have people that are telling you that you are the man, you are going to believe it sooner or later. So yeah, it just demonstrates that our hope wasn't necessarily in Jesus. Our hope was in the preaching ability of our pastor, the charisma of our pastor, the mystique of our worship, and those kind of things brought us 30 pieces of silver that we were willing to turn away from our Savior for. So yeah.
Which is called a PP loan. The 30 pieces of silver was the PP loan, which we also got forgiven. So there's that.
The debt was can't. Yeah, no, and you're right. And this is the thing: is like the inconsistency has been the consistency of the church leaders, right? And so that's the thing: is that those 30 pieces we continue to be reminded how easy it is for us to offer, to take the 30 pieces, to turn on the one, and that he became, he became everything that we shun, that we push. That, and I think sometimes the evangelical church forgets that. We forget because we're so, hey, rightfully so, anti-sin, right? But it's the way in which I feel like the white evangelical church has seemingly disembraced, not embraced the Black Lives Matter and the racial injustice. I feel like that's the way the white evangelical church has pushed that away, is the way that it deals with sin. Is if we just, to say, oh, look, well, there's bad out there, so we just will shy away from racial inequalities. We recognize that there's badness with racial inequality, and yes, we need to understand that. So what we do is we just don't talk about it. We push it aside and say everything's okay. If you just believe that everything's okay, it will be. And I feel like the way that and then I'm concerned about that seeping into COVID-19 again as the church moves forward in its inconsistencies, because the leaders don't know, the push, like, to be compassionate, to recognize there might be folks that are pro-vaccination simply because they want to be better. Look at, I've got something. There might be folks that though are anti-vaccination because of serious health things, and they have serious concerns, just the same as there could be people on both sides of an issue, whether or not you do infant baptism or adult baptism, right? I wonder if we've just lost the art of dialogue within the church, because, like you both have said, it's been about the leader. And so the way a leader gets their voice heard in today's American culture is you're loud, you're obnoxious, and you're boisterous, and so the louder and the bolder you are, it equates to more followers, right? The church has to stop that, and so this is the continued push, building relational bridges. How do we do that? If you both had one thing to say for the 21st Christian, we just entered March, we're talking about this. What is the Christian's posture, though, as we continue to push into Easter, the Easter season, and then with the COVID, with mass? What would you say, though, for a parishioner? They're coming, they're saying, what is the best way, though, for me to just embrace this moment as a Christ follower? What is our counsel to those around us within the Christian? What's the best way to embrace this?
Yeah, for me, right off the bat, ministry is not locked in a building. So just because you can't go to the building doesn't mean that you have to stop worshiping. It doesn't mean that you stop doing ministry. It's not locked in that building.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say I don't think anything changes for us. Exactly what Phil says. We just actually have an opportunity to live into our convictions, because so many of our churches believe that ministry is not only located in a building. So now I think it's a prime opportunity for us to live out what we've actually been preaching before COVID. I think it's simple as that.
Yep. And that's what we're going to continue to do. New Wine Uncorked, about uncorking the possibility, the truth of who we are, our potentiality, so it becomes actualized, becomes real in our lives today. And so on behalf of Tony and on behalf on Phil, this is a New Wine Uncorked, another episode. And we're going to be here next week. We're going to continue to jump into this. And so what does that look like? Ministry outside the box. You know, so often things have been boxed in over COVID and even the years past, you know. So what does that look like? Ministry outside the box, so we don't box ourselves in. So until then, I'm Matt, that's Phil, that's Tony. This has been New Wine Uncorked. We'll see you on the flip side. Have a good one. Thanks for joining us.